March 22, 1945. The phone rang in the quiet of the Supreme Commander's office. Dwight D. Eisenhower picked up the receiver, expecting a routine update on final preparations for the largest, most meticulously planned river assault in history. The voice on the other end was not that of his logistics chief or his British counterpart. It was George S. Patton, crackling across a field telephone line from hundreds of miles away. And the 4 words he uttered were the last 4 words Eisenhower expected to hear that night, or any night before the planned operation. "We are across the Rhine." For a long second, there was only silence on the line. Eisenhower actually pulled the phone from his ear and stared at it, as if the instrument itself had betrayed him. He knew what those words meant. They meant that his most brilliant and most difficult general had just shattered the entire Allied operational timetable, upstaged a monumental British-led offensive, and thrown the delicate political balance of the high command into chaos. What Eisenhower said in that moment, and in the explosive hours that followed, was not recorded by any official stenographer. But it revealed everything about Supreme Command, about managing unmanageable genius, and about the visceral clash between meticulous order and breathtaking opportunism. This is the story of what Eisenhower really said when Patton crossed the Rhine earlier than anyone thought possible. March 1945. The Rhine River was not merely a geographic feature on a map. It was a myth, a psychological fortress, the last great moat guarding the heart of the German fatherland. For years, Nazi propaganda had saturated its own people and warned the world that the Rhine was impassable, a natural barrier where invading armies would meet their watery doom. German schoolchildren were taught its history of invincibility. No foreign army had successfully forced a crossing in living memory against determined defenders. Adolf Hitler himself had proclaimed, "The Rhine must be held at all costs. It is Germany's lifeline." On the Allied side, this psychological weight was fully acknowledged. Eisenhower's planning staff at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, treated the Rhine with a respect bordering on reverence. Intelligence reports painted a daunting picture. Defensive fortifications rebuilt after the failed attempt at Arnhem, veteran troops dug into the eastern banks, artillery zeroed in on every potential crossing point, and the swift, cold current of the river itself acting as a natural ally to the defender. Crossing the Rhine would not be like crossing the Seine or the Moselle. This was the final gate, and the Germans were prepared to bolt it shut with everything they had left. The Allied plan to breach this gate was a masterpiece of systematic, overwhelming force. Codenamed Operation Plunder, it was to be led by Field Marshal Montgomery in the north. This was Montgomery's show, a set-piece battle on a colossal scale designed to showcase British military prowess and careful generalship. Over 1 million men, thousands of artillery pieces, and a vast armada of amphibious vehicles were assembled. A major airborne component, Operation Varsity, involving thousands of paratroopers and gliders, would spearhead the assault. The planning had been underway since January, a slow, deliberate buildup of staggering logistical complexity. The operation was scheduled for the night of March 23rd through 24th. Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself was to be in attendance, a symbolic witness to this historic breach of Germany's last natural defense. The message was clear. The Rhine would fall to professionalism, power, and impeccable planning. In this grand design, General George Patton's Third Army, driving through the Saar region in the south, had a supporting role. The operational sequence was logical and clear. Montgomery would make the main, heavily publicized crossing, establishing a massive bridgehead. Once that northern foothold was secure and German reserves were drawn to it, other Allied armies, including Patton, would make their own coordinated crossings at designated points. The idea that Patton would cross first was not just outside the plan, it was antithetical to it. Third Army was engaged in heavy fighting, miles from what were considered viable crossing sites. They possessed no special river crossing equipment, no concentrated artillery arrays for preparatory bombardment, and no orders to do anything but continue pressing toward the river. The Rhine crossing, in the official and diplomatic sense, belonged to Montgomery. Yet in a quiet office at SHAEF, a nagging doubt persisted in Eisenhower's mind. He knew Patton. He knew the man's relentless drive, his obsession with personal and American glory, and his profound disdain for what he saw as Montgomery's cautious, plotting methods. The day before the unexpected crossing, March 21st, Eisenhower voiced this unease to his chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. "George is getting dangerously close to the river in his sector," Eisenhower mused, studying the situation map. "I have this terrible feeling he might try something rash. The last thing we need right now is for him to turn this operation into a personal race." Bedell Smith, the embodiment of gruff staff pragmatism, dismissed the concern. "Sir, with all due respect, Patton wouldn't dare. A opposed Rhine crossing requires specialized engineering, detailed preparation, and top-down coordination. Not even General Patton can improvise that." Eisenhower wanted to believe him, but a part of him, the part that remembered Patton's relentless drive across France, his impossible relief of Bastogne, knew better. With Patton, one learned to expect the unexpected, no matter how implausible. Late on the evening of March 22nd, Eisenhower was at his headquarters in Rheims, immersed in the final, intricate details of Montgomery's imminent operation. The atmosphere was one of tense anticipation. Then the jarring ring of the telephone cut through the focused quiet. An aide answered, spoke briefly in a low tone, and his expression shifted from routine alertness to one of profound confusion. He covered the mouthpiece. "Sir, it's General Patton. He says it's urgent." Eisenhower felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Urgent from Patton could mean anything from a catastrophic defeat to an unprecedented victory with no middle ground. He took the receiver. "George, what is it? What's wrong?" Patton's voice, bursting with barely contained triumph, came down the line. "Wrong? Ike, not a damn thing is wrong. I just wanted you to be the first to know. Third Army elements crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim about an hour ago. We've got a firm hold on the East Bank. Casualties are lighter than a Sunday picnic." The silence that followed was profound. Eisenhower was, for one of the few times in the war, utterly speechless. He later recalled the moment as a sensory blur. The detailed maps of Operation Plunder on his desk seemed to swim before his eyes. He managed to speak, his voice dangerously calm. "George, say that again, slowly. You crossed the Rhine, tonight." "That's affirmative, Ike," Patton replied, the pride dripping from every syllable. "At Oppenheim, used assault boats. The Germans were asleep at the switch, barely a handful of re-echelon troops on the other side. We're expanding the bridgehead as we speak." Then came the characteristic, needling jab that was pure Patton, a verbal grenade tossed at the absent Montgomery. "And I should add, we managed this little feat without the benefit of a preliminary aerial bombardment, a massive artillery barrage, ground smoke, or airborne troops. Just good old American infantry. Thought you appreciate the economy of force." Eisenhower closed his eyes. A torrent of conflicting emotions crashed over him. The first was a soldier's genuine relief and elation. The Rhine, the Great Barrier, was crossed. The second was a commander's white-hot frustration. This was a blatant, deliberate breach of the operational sequence. The third was a diplomat's deep anxiety. Managing the fallout with Montgomery and Churchill would be a nightmare. And the fourth, which he could never admit aloud in that moment, was a pure, unadulterated spark of admiration for the sheer audacity of it. His response, filtered through this whirlwind, was measured but carried an edge. "George, you know this was not the plan. You were to wait for the coordinated effort. Montgomery's operation begins tomorrow night. This creates complications." Patton's retort was unrepentant. "The plan, Ike, was to cross the Rhine and defeat the German army. We found a soft spot. We hit it. Why sit on our hands and wait for a formal invitation when the door is wide open? The Rhine is just another river. We're across. We're staying across. And we're driving deeper into Germany. My men are in high spirits, that's the report. After a few more terse exchanges, Eisenhower hung up. He sat perfectly still for a long moment, his face an unreadable mask. Every officer in the room had been watching him, trying to decipher the one-sided conversation. Bedell Smith finally broke the silence. "Well, what has Patton done now?" Eisenhower looked up, and his reply, etched into the memory of all present, was the first true revelation of what he thought. It was a perfect crystallization of the Patton dilemma. "George," he said, his voice a mix of exasperation and awe, "has gone and crossed the Rhine. Tonight, at Oppenheim, without authorization, without preparation, and almost certainly without encountering significant resistance. At this moment, I cannot decide whether I should promote him on the spot or have him court-martialed." What followed in the headquarters was not celebration but controlled pandemonium. Eisenhower's next actions defined the essence of supreme command. He had to perform a series of deeply unpleasant tasks, each requiring a different facet of his personality. First, he had to inform Field Marshal Montgomery. This was a task he personally dreaded. Placing the call, he was the diplomat, softening the blow while stating the blunt fact. "Monty, I've just received word from Patton. Elements of Third Army have established a crossing at Oppenheim this evening." The silence on the other end of the line was, by all accounts, glacial. Montgomery's meticulously planned, historically significant operation had just been demoted to a secondary event. All the elaborate staging, the gathering of dignitaries, the narrative of the British-led triumph, was shattered by a single, unauthorized American action. Eisenhower's words were chosen to emphasize the continued importance of plunder, but the damage was done. The news was a profound personal and professional humiliation for Montgomery. Next, Eisenhower had to brief Winston Churchill. Here, he was the statesman, managing the expectations of a powerful political leader who was also a keen student of military symbolism. Churchill had been eagerly anticipating watching British troops storm the mythic river. Now, he was being told the historic first crossing had already happened in a quiet sector with little fanfare. Eisenhower's explanation focused on the positive strategic shock to the Germans and the overall acceleration of the campaign, but Churchill, though he maintained a stiff upper lip, was visibly disappointed. The dramatic spectacle he had come to witness had been stolen. Finally, Eisenhower had to address his own staff and craft a public statement. Here, he was the corporate CEO in damage control mode, ensuring internal cohesion and shaping the external narrative. The statement he authored was a diplomatic masterpiece of calculated ambiguity. It read, "Elements of the U.S. Third Army successfully crossed the Rhine River at Oppenheim on the evening of March 22nd. This operation, combined with the major crossing operation to be launched tonight in the north, demonstrates the overwhelming and coordinated power of the Allied offensive into the heart of Germany." Notice the language. Elements made it sound like a minor, probing action. Successfully crossed stated the fact without glorification. Combined with and coordinated power, ingeniously framed Patton's freelance action as part of the grand design, a fiction everyone at SHAEF knew to be false, but was necessary for Allied harmony. The statement acknowledged Patton's deed without praising it, and protected Montgomery's operation without diminishing the reality of the American achievement. It was a tightrope walk in prose. But the Private Eisenhower, the man behind the commander's mask, revealed more in the subsequent hours. To his confidants, his frustration boiled over. "George has done it again," he fumed to Bedell Smith. "He sees war as a personal competition. Montgomery has spent months planning a textbook operation that will minimize casualties and ensure a solid bridgehead. George treats it like a football game, calling an audible at the line just to score first. He doesn't consider the political repercussions, the strain on the alliance, the sheer chaos it introduces into a carefully orchestrated campaign." Yet, even in this venting, the strategic analyst in Eisenhower could not be silenced. He would pause, stare at the map where a new, unexpected bridgehead now existed at Oppenheim, and add, "But look at the results. He's across with negligible losses. He's done it with a fraction of the resources Monty will use tomorrow. The operational efficiency, however insubordinate, is staggering. The next day, March 23rd, Eisenhower called Patton back. This conversation was less about immediate reporting and more about reckoning. According to Patton's own diary and accounts from aides, Eisenhower began with a sigh. "George, what you accomplished tactically is nothing short of brilliant. You took an impregnable barrier and treated it like a shallow creek. You've demoralized the German command in that sector and proven our mobility beyond doubt." Then his tone hardened. "But strategically and diplomatically, you have handed me a basket of snakes. You have deliberately embarrassed a key ally on the eve of his most important operation. You have forced me to spend precious political capital smoothing over cracks in the alliance when my focus should be on defeating the enemy. You operate as if this is a one-army show." Patton, never one for contrition, defended his action with the core philosophy that drove him. "Ike, with all due respect, my job is to kill Germans and end this war as fast as possible. We had an opening. To wait would have been criminal negligence against my men and against the objective. I didn't cross to show up Monty. I crossed because the enemy was weak and we were strong. Isn't that the fundamental principle of warfare? Or have we become so entangled in ceremony that we've forgotten how to win?" This exchange cut to the heart of the conflict. It wasn't just about a river crossing. It was a clash of two irreconcilable command philosophies. The manager versus the warrior, the orchestrated symphony versus the jazz improvisation. Eisenhower could not refute Patton's results, and Patton would never understand Eisenhower's broader burdens. What Eisenhower said in this private call was ultimately a summation of their entire relationship. A rebuke wrapped in a compliment, a leash made of silk, an acknowledgement that he needed this difficult, magnificent weapon, even as it threatened to cut the hand that wielded it. In the days that followed, as Montgomery's colossal Operation Plunder unfolded with its awesome, predictable power, Eisenhower had time to reflect on the deeper lessons of Patton's surprise. He realized the Oppenheim crossing was more than a stunt, it was a paradigm shift. In a staff conference on March 25th, he articulated these thoughts. "Gentlemen," he said, "while General Patton's method of crossing the Rhine was unorthodox, it has demonstrated several critical principles. First, it proves that in modern, fluid warfare, surprise and audacity can achieve what tons of explosives and months of planning can sometimes overcomplicate. The Germans were psychologically prepared for Monty's hammer blow. They were not prepared for a silent knife in the dark at Oppenheim. Second, it highlights the distinct American talent for improvisation and decentralized decision-making. Our system produces commanders who can see and seize an opportunity without waiting for a signed order from headquarters. This is not a weakness. It is a formidable, adaptive strength." He continued, seeing the bigger picture. "This event also validates the command philosophy of employing different tools for different tasks. Montgomery is the master of the set-piece battle, the unavoidable, grinding advance that gives the enemy no strategic optionality. Patton is the master of the opportunistic thrust, the rapid exploitation that collapses enemy morale and creates strategic shock. My job is not to make Patton behave like Montgomery or vice versa. My job is to deploy them where their unique talents will be most effective, and to manage the interpersonal friction that results." Eisenhower's ultimate judgment on the incident and on Patton himself was best captured in his post-war memoir, Crusade in Europe. Writing with the benefit of hindsight and no immediate diplomatic fires to put out, his words carried a clearer tone of admiration. "Patton's crossing of the Rhine at Oppenheim," he wrote, "was the culmination of the traits that made him both a monumental asset and a perpetual headache. It was executed with a breathtaking blend of insight, timing, and ruthless efficiency. It shortened the war, saved lives, and demonstrated to the enemy that no terrain, no matter how mythologized, was safe from the Allied advance. The complications it caused at Supreme Headquarters were real and taxing, but they were the price of doing business with a military phenomenon. Perhaps the most telling revelation of what Eisenhower truly thought came years later in a 1962 interview. The interviewer asked him point-blank, "General, when Patton called you on March 22, 1945, and told you he'd crossed the Rhine, what was your very first, unfiltered thought?" Eisenhower, then an elder statesman, allowed a wry smile to cross his face. "My first thought," he said, "was of course he did. Because by that stage of the war, nothing George did could truly surprise me. The utterly improbable was his standard operating procedure. My second thought was, dear God, how do I explain this to Monty and the Prime Minister? The politics of high command descended on me like a heavy cloak in that instant. And my third thought," he said, pausing for effect, his eyes reflecting the memory, "was a profound and heartfelt thank God. Thank God that man is on our side and not on the other. Thank God his relentless drive is aimed at our enemies. Thank God for the men like him who refuse to accept the word impossible." He concluded, offering the final, synthesized verdict. "What I said to him on the phone was a mixture of reprimand and congratulations, which probably left him as confused as ever about my feelings. But what I felt was the complex relief of a commander who has just been handed a stunning victory by the one man capable of delivering it in such an inconvenient fashion. The Rhine crossing was George Patton in a nutshell. Exasperating, brilliant, and ultimately indispensable." If you found this exploration of command, conflict, and history compelling, there is more to uncover. The true story of how wars are won is not just found in the grand strategies, but in these tense, human moments between giants, in what is said in a quiet office after a shocking phone call, and what is left unspoken, hanging in the air like the echo of a victory no one had planned for. This is where history turns. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment to encourage me for making such content. See you in the next video.